in the Davie campus. I'm joined by one of my absolute favorite people and favorite guests, Ed Dentzel from Unfound. Ed is a pretty regular here, and I think this is like our fifth time, I'm thinking.
Fifth time talking, yes.
Something like that, and we're just so grateful to him that he takes time out of his busy schedule to talk about these important missing persons cases. Ed is a journalist. He was a screenwriter, filmmaker, actor extraordinaire, and he now is the host of Unfound. And that's it. You can find that on YouTube. He'll tell you a little bit about where to find him. He has quite a following, and one of the things that I love a lot of things about Ed, but one of the things that I love about Ed is how much he cares about his work, how passionate he is about giving voice to these victims, and particularly giving voice to the victims' families. Many of these cases, all of these cases, in fact, are unsolved mysteries, if you will. And what Ed does is he talks about the case, he gives you all of the facts, and then you get to decide or ask further questions. It's a fact-finding mission. So anyway, we are so happy to have Ed back again, and we will definitely be doing this again and again and again. We just don't have another show scheduled because we're going to be going on break soon with Thanksgiving and then the Christmas break, but we definitely will resume in January. And Ed and I will talk about some dates, so you won't miss a thing. And this time, this time we invited Alpha Phi Sigma. I hope that they are on. We'll see. But definitely we're going to really publicize a lot on Alpha Phi Sigma. Alpha Phi Sigma is an honor society for criminal justice, and I'm one of the chapter advisors. And so we're trying to really get not only our undergrad and our grad and our PhD students involved here, but Alpha Phi Sigma as well. So we'll see what happens down the road. But anyway, with no further ado, Ed Dentzel.
Dr. Telesco, thank you for that introduction. I'm hoping in 2021, when maybe, hopefully we can continue this in the new year, that you and I can do this in person. When things, loosen up maybe a little bit, hopefully, we never know what's going to happen. But yeah, the listeners or viewers should know that you and I have never met in person, but I can't wait to do that. In fact, we were supposed to, when we first scheduled our first get together way back in April, the idea was for me to go down there and meet you in person. Then all the COVID stuff happened, and that of course didn't happen.
That's exactly right.
So we've only known each other remotely.
That's right. So, and I would love to. I know you're a big disc golf guy, and we have a great disc golf course down here in Fort Lauderdale. I think we have a few of them, but one in particular, Easterland Park. So definitely, you can make a whole weekend out of it. And I think that we'll be okay. I think that vaccines are coming out, and you and I will be first online maybe to get one.
Yeah.
I don't know. We'll see.
I'll get it. I'll surely get it for sure. For sure. Okay, great.
Excellent. All right.
Well, I can't wait for that.
Tell us about your work, and tell us about this case in particular.
Okay, I'll first tell you a little bit about the program. If people are not familiar, they are tuning in for the first time. Unfound, you see on the shirt here and on the wall back there, is a program I started back in September of 2016. It is a weekly podcast that is played on iTunes, Podomatic, Spotify, and a variety of other podcast platforms. Over the past 4+ years, we've covered almost 200 disappearances. So we have over 200 episodes, because there's some other episodes that are mixed in there. But over the last 4+ years, we've devoted every single episode to missing persons cases. And those have been all over the United States, a few in Canada, and one in Africa, of an American who went missing in Africa. So that's what we do. Along the way, I've picked up 6 assistants. They are volunteers who fill a variety of roles behind the scenes. Their names are Emily, Cherie, Carrie, Heather, Eric, and Natasha. And I feel so lucky and fortunate to have all of them. The program and everything that we do on YouTube and everywhere else, those things could not happen without these people behind the scenes. So I have to give a shout out to them anytime I can, because they are my trusted confidants. We talk about a lot of things, about cases, about all sorts of different situations behind the scenes. So they've been very valuable to me. I do a live show on YouTube on the Unfound podcast channel on YouTube on Wednesday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern. It usually goes about two hours. And I talk about true crime issues, things that are in the news, things that are going on with the program. And the viewers can also ask me questions about things that have nothing to do with disappearances. My only criteria is it's PG rated and it's not too personal. So we may talk about music and food and disc golf and whatever else during that. But most of the time, 80% of the program on Wednesday nights is concerning true crime of one kind or another. So I enjoy doing it. I feel like it's something that my place in the world, and I take it very seriously. And I work on this program every day of the week, even when I go out of town for disc golf tournaments. And the new episodes come out every Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern. So with all that, maybe I'll take you into the disappearance we will be talking about this evening. It's the disappearance of Robin Abrams. She disappeared from Illinois, Will County, Illinois, in 1990. And I was just saying before we went on the air is that we've covered quite a few disappearances over the last 4 years, and I just have to be honest, where police officers or deputies or retired or fired police officers are suspects. In fact, at last count, I would say about 8% of the disappearances that we've covered, a police officer of one type or another could be a suspect. It's talked about during that episode. Well, Robin's was, I don't know, maybe about the 7th or 8th, 9th, somewhere in there, the 9th episode that I ever did back in 2016, almost exactly 4 years ago. And this disappearance from 30 years ago kind of set the tone for that, because this is the first disappearance that we covered on the program where police officers were suspects, and frankly, they continue to be suspects 30 years later. In fact, even more so. And it's still probably, in my estimation, the worst one. We've had others that have come after this one, but in reviewing this, and I've gone back and listened to the original episode from 2016, listened to the interview that I did with her sister, Jody Walsh, who I've talked to Jody a few times over the last couple weeks because she knew that we would be covering this disappearance, her sister's disappearance, on the show tonight. It's still something that you just can't believe it happened. You just can't believe it. So here's what was going on. Robin, by all counts, before she ever became, and she was a police officer herself, maybe I should state that before we get into this, a nice young woman in her mid-20s. She was managing a McDonald's at the time, right around 1987, 1988. And what happened was one day she's working there, and an auxiliary police officer for Will County, Illinois. If you don't know where Will County is, it's the county directly south of Chicago in the state of Illinois. He came in there and started talking to Robin, and he thought, you know what, maybe you should, we're looking for women in the police department. There's some openings. Maybe you should consider that. Well, this kind of got Robin's attention because her own father was a police officer. So she said, okay, I'll give it a shot. And even though she was a manager at McDonald's and she was already in her mid-20s, it seems to me that when people decide to get in law enforcement, maybe they're a little younger than that, and they don't maybe come from going from being a manager of a McDonald's to becoming a police officer, but maybe. So she signed up. She got into the academy. Well, at the same time, and as I now know, I don't know how many people knew this, but she started a relationship with Tony Marquez as well. So he was not a full-blown police officer. He was an auxiliary police officer, meaning he was only called out if they needed more police officers. He was essentially a volunteer, not paid. At least at the time in Illinois, they were allowed to carry guns, but they would be called like for crowd, like directing traffic, things like that. And in fact, here in Clearwater Beach, I've seen some of those officers around here as well. But he was really an insurance salesman. And that's, I think, what he continues to do to this day. But he got involved with that and then convinced Robin that she should be doing it too, but as a full-blown getting paid police officer. So she gets into this. They get into a relationship. Well, at some point in 89 into 1990, right on the verge of when she was going to be becoming, like through a probation period, something like that, she found out that Tony Marquez was married. And because of that, she immediately broke it off. And what started was a never-ending stream of harassment, not just from Tony Marquez, but from other deputies and superiors in the Will County Police Department. Even though she was there, she was working with some of these people, there was a never-ending stream of harassment. And it continued on. And in fact, this was even witnessed, and I got to talk to this person. This was even witnessed by another Will County police officer out in front of his house. He didn't know, he knew Robin, didn't really work with her, but he knew her by name. She knew him. But at the time, he did not know that, what was going on, these things that they tried to keep out of the sight of other people. But one of these incidents happened right out in front of his house, coincidentally, near the fairgrounds in Will County. And he came out to see what was going on, and there was Robin. And even though she was a deputy on her private time, these other deputies, their co-workers, were dragging Robin out of her car, claiming that I think what this guy said was that she had broken Tony's antenna on his car. So what Tony was there were over the period of, I don't have the time span, but in this period of 1989 into 1990, over 100 charges were filed against Robin by Tony Marquez, saying that she was stalking him. And this continued, but she was still on duty as a deputy, once again, trying to become a full-blown, through her probation period. And you should know, this was just not an old boys club. There were women on this police force that were assisting in this harassment as well. And so finally what happened, and in fact, maybe you can put that picture up now, we have a picture of one of the times that Robin got arrested. It's a black and white photo. I think if you go to, there it is. Thank you, Dr. Telesco. This is one of the photos you will find, for example, on the Charlie Project. This picture, if you're wondering why she has her eyes down like that and has that, on the expression on the right, this is one of the times that she was arrested. And I don't know if it was this time. She was arrested quite a few times, but none of the charges ever stuck, but they kept doing it. And in fact, at least one of those times, they put her in a cell with 10 other male criminals. Her own co-workers were doing this to her. And this was all because she broke up with Tony after she found out that he was married. And you should know he's still married to this day. And he didn't like it. But there's going to be more to this story as I go on. So she was putting up with all of this. The police department is quite large. These, what I would call corrupt cops, were a small number. But now what I've learned just recently is that they were in league with other supervisors, and they just kind of controlled things. And I even heard a story in which they were keeping tabs on any other good police officers to make sure that they didn't try to report anything that they found out was going on. In fact, I had one tell me that he thought his house was bugged, that they had snuck into his house and bugged his house, so he would know, and bugged his phone line so they would know what he was saying about everything that they were doing. He told me this. Well, eventually what happened is that right before her probation period would have been up, and it would have been a lot more difficult to get rid of her, her supervisor, who was in on all of this, fired her. And this happened in 1990. Immediately, what happened was she filed a sexual harassment lawsuit and unlawful termination, as you can imagine, a whole host of charges against all of the guys that you now see in this picture. Now, Tony Marquez, you see him on the far left. John Roma, we're going to talk about him in a bit. But all of those men that you see on the right side of the screen, Tony Marquez, John Johnson, Robert Brown, etc., they were all named in this lawsuit. And she had gone on in, she was living at home now with her parents. She's 28 years old. And she went in and she already had given her deposition, her part of the case, to the state regarding this, lawsuit that she brought. Huge lawsuit, as you can imagine. And it was after her, just days after she gave her testimony in this, is when she disappeared. Now, there was an incident that I kind of left out of this, but just to give you another example that this was not something of her imagination. One day, once again, this was still when she was a deputy on a probationary period. She was in her mother's van. They were together. Tony Marquez showed up. I don't know if he was following them or whatever. Somewhere on the road, he got out of his car and started hitting the van with a bat. And there's another story that Robin's sister told me about that has been verified, that not long after this, all of the tires on Robin's mother's van were slashed. You should know that here in 2020 that both of Robin's parents are now deceased. But there was this endless harassment of her. And so this was, of course, what led to her filing this lawsuit after she got fired. Well, not long after she gave this testimony is when she disappeared. So you should know that also before she disappeared, some of these things that had happened and all these charges against her, they went to court regarding all of the stuff that allegedly Robin was doing to Tony. And the jury found her completely not guilty on everything, every single charge. And in fact, on top of that, the judge in the case went one step farther, and he had a protection order filed against Tony Marquez for him to stay away from her, for her to stay away from him, for him to stay away from her. So that should tell you something about what the judge thought about all of this. And one more thing regarding this incident that happened, this other officer witnessed out in front of his house. While they were pulling Robin out of her car and arresting her on some trumped up charge, one of the men who was a supervisor in Will County, who was there, said, "I think we should just kill this bitch." So, and this other officer told me about this. So, we have all this going on. So then on October 4th, 1990, once again, this lawsuit that she has filed against Will County, I think a lawsuit that would have ended up being in the millions. She was by herself. She had a red Dodge Daytona. Maybe some of you people remember, it's kind of a sporty hatchback type of car of the late 80s, early 90s, made by Dodge. She was by herself. She was leaving her house. She was going one way. She was by herself, and her father was coming the other direction. And they waved to each other, and that's the last time anybody ever saw Robin. To this day, nobody knows where she was going. She didn't say. but she disappeared. And very quickly, when she didn't return home, you know, the be on the lookout for Robin was put out there. The problem, her family lived in Will County where all of this stuff was going on. Well, a couple of days later, in Harvey, Illinois, which is Cook County is where Chicago is. So this would be the county immediately north of Will County. A woman in a neighborhood up there in Harvey, Illinois, found a purse out in her front yard. And when they went it, there was identification in it, and it was Robin's. At around the same time, her car was also found about 3 blocks away. It was locked, but the keys, from what I read, were in it. I don't know how they locked it with the keys in the car, but that's what I've been told. That's what I've read. So the car was found, the purse was found. And this is about an hour away from where a family lives. This is about an hour away from Joliet, Illinois, which is the county seat of Will County. So being that she was a resident of Will County, even though the car and everything were found in Cook County, the investigation, the department that was in charge of the investigation of her disappearance was Will County, where she was having all of these problems. Now, luckily and coincidentally, the guy who took the missing persons report when her family first called it in was the same guy who witnessed her being harassed out in front of his house that day. It was just a weird coincidence that that's how it happened. And I've gotten to talk to him.
And I was just going to ask you.
Yeah, please.
I was just going to ask you something, Ed. I know that you had said that you just recently were able to talk to somebody about the case, and is actually a member of law enforcement.
Yes.
Who worked during this time.
Yes.
Is this a time that you want to speak about that, or are you going to talk?
I will. I can't, you know, this guy is not afraid of it. She names him, but I don't know if I want to get into deep. I'll mention some things that he said, but I just want to make sure that I don't say too much of what he said, because it was off the record. But I will say that I substantiated many things that Jody said in the original interview from 2016 by talking to him. Okay, so, but I will mention how that all came together before this is all over, for sure. But I don't want him to feel, because I know he's watching now, that everything he said is immediately going to go to the air. We had an agreement that, you know, we would keep many things that he said off the record, but I will talk about the things that he said in support of what Jody told me in 2016. Okay, so that's how I'm going to be handling that. But it was Jody that facilitated me getting to talk to this this person anyway. So he was the guy that took the police report, the missing persons report in Will County. But then a couple days later, her purse is found, her car is found, but not in Will County, in Cook County, but Will County is now responsible. Well, unfortunately, what I also discovered is that the person on Will County who was responsible for the investigation, this guy that I talked to just simply took the report, but the guy who was in charge of the investigation of Robin's disappearance, once again, was one of this crew, of this bad crew in the Will County Sheriff's Department at the time. So you could probably understand how that went. Well, not long after her car was found, a witness in Cook County came forward and said, you know what, I saw the car being put there. He didn't say that it was parked there. He said, I saw the car being put there. Well, when they talked to this guy, and I don't know this witness's name, here where Jody's car or Robin's car was found, a tow truck had brought it there and deposited it there. It wasn't a person who drove it there and walked off. It wasn't Robin who drove it there and walked off. It was being towed, and it was set down. I don't know if it was in a parking lot along the street, but this person witnessed it. And when the person described, and you could put that picture back up that you had up before with all of those men, Dr. Telesco, if you could. The guy who saw the two guys in the tow truck, his description perfectly matched Tony Marquez and his stepbrother, John Romo. Those two pictures that you're seeing on the left side of the screen. Okay, now we have to remember, Tony Marquez had a relationship with Robin. She dumped him, the harassment that went on, and then somehow a witness who surely did not know about anything that was going on in Will County between Robin and all these guys, including Tony Marquez, he picked Tony out of a bunch of pictures, and that was the description that he gave someone. But the problem is, as the reason we're even talking about this tonight on November 19th, 2020, is this still wasn't enough to charge anybody with anything. And the case is still unsolved. Now, you should also know this. What they were able to discover later, and luckily, not long after Robin disappeared, actually, Tony Marquez and others did get fired from the police department. Why? A new regime came into the county, and some of these guys were let go, but many of them ended up being police officers and retired as police officers that were involved in all of this. But Tony was one of the ones that got fired. To remind you, he was just an auxiliary police officer, so I doubt he was in the union or could get any protection because of that. But so this then eventually, this was turned over. The state police in Illinois got involved. And so for many years, Tony Marquez said, of course, he had nothing to do with it. John Roman said he had nothing to do with it. Everybody's just saying, we just don't know what happened. Now, you should also know there was an alleged sighting of Robin, possibly, we're not sure, but that day that she disappeared, she was seen at a gas station in Joliet, Illinois, and allegedly Tony Marquez was also seen at that gas station that same day, allegedly. And that was the day that she disappeared.
Ed, I'm gonna just interrupt 1 second. We have somebody, Betty Jean.
Don't know.
Okay, Betty Jean might be Alpha Phi Sigma, maybe one of our students. I'm not sure, but is asking for the 2016 interview link.
It's on Podomatic. If you go to podomatic.com/unfound or Unfound podcast, you should be able to find it. It's one of the oldest ones, so you have to probably scroll down quite a bit to get to it because the newest ones are at the top of the page. Or you can also go to Spotify and do a search for Unfound and Robin Abrams. If you have a Spotify account, or you could go to Unfound on iTunes. It's out there in a variety of locations. In fact, I know that I posted a link on the Facebook page for Unfound as well. If somebody wants to go back and listen to that from 2016, the interview that I did with, once again, her sister, Jody Walsh is her sister's name.
Thank you.
So, as you would suspect, that at the time in 1990 when Robin disappeared, the family absolutely suspected that people in the Will County Sheriff's Office had something to do with her disappearance, knowing everything that had gone on.
So actually, Ed, just so you know, Betty Jean is one of Robin's family members. Okay.
Oh, okay. I guess okay. I know Jody. I know that Robin has 3 sisters or 4 sisters. So maybe that's one of them. I don't know. I know Jody specifically. I think she has been the main person over all these years trying to make sure that Robin's disappearance gets solved. Well, like I said, the family immediately thought that Will County Sheriff's Department had something to do with it, but of course they were suspicious given that it's Will County that was investigating it. And eventually it went over to the state police, and they thought that an investigation was being done. It wasn't until 2012 that there was a woman, her name is Cindy, a private investigator in Illinois, who took it upon herself to get interested in it. She worked in Will County, helping battered women, and she found out about Robin Abrams, had heard about what had happened back in 1990 and how Robin disappeared. Well, she started compiling information, doing FOIAs, etc., regarding everything that either Will County or the state police were supposed to do. And what she discovered was that none of those men that you had in that picture up there before, none of the men who she named in her lawsuit were ever questioned. None of them, zero, were ever questioned regarding Robin's disappearance. Not their whereabouts, not anything. Zero. That's one of the things. The state police didn't do it, and of course, Will County didn't do it. When Robin's family found out about this, as you can imagine, they were outraged. There's something else, though, that happened. This story that came out, this guy's name is Art Burchett or Bruchette. I don't know how to spell his last name. I think it's Bruchette. I could be wrong about that. But in this paperwork that this woman, Cindy, was able to get and finally give to Robin's family in 2012, so only 8 years ago, it said in 1996, Art Bruchette got in trouble for something. It had to do with him and his son, illegal guns or something like that. And in being investigated, he said he knew something about the disappearance of Robin Abrams. And what he said was that back in 1990, that he had believed that somebody, and he was, and just to be honest with you, Art Bruchette was mobbed up. He wasn't a wise guy, but he had dealings with the Chicago mob. And so he knew those circles. But he said that at one time in 1990, not long after Robin disappeared, he claims some people came onto his land and buried something. And what happened was he let law enforcement know about this, and he pointed out the place where this area should be dug. But the supervising officer from Will County, when they went out to do this in late 1990 or 1991, the officer who's John Moss, who was the chief deputy, so there's like, I guess, the sheriff and then like the chief of all the deputies, kind of like the sheriff's right-hand man, he would not allow the people digging to dig in the area that Art Bruchette pointed out on his own property. He said, no, we're not going to, we're not digging over there. We're going to dig over here. If we don't even find anything in this very spot, we're out of here. And that's exactly what happened. Well, what happened is when the new regime of sheriffs came in and some of these people got let go, they went out to Art Bruchette's property. Again, this is, that's not the property. You can take that map down. That is not the property. That's going to come up a little later. And what Art Bruchette said the next time around, when they came out and dug at his property, there was a sunken grave there. There was sunken yard, and it was obvious that something had been in the ground at that time. But it seems whatever was in the ground had been moved. This is Art Bruchette's story that he told in 1996. This is something that Robin's family knew nothing about. They went for 20-some years knowing about none of this. None of it. There was another story. Another burial story that popped up, and this had to do with a letter that Jody got from a guy. She used the name Joe, but that's not the real name. He said that around that time, he knew a guy who owned a piece of property on South Joliet Road, 12210 South Joliet Road in Manhattan, Illinois. And he said that this guy was kind of, shady and everything. And he had heard a story, this guy Joe, that they had buried somebody on this guy's land. Well, this didn't come out until many years later. And what Jody found out is that a new person bought the land several years after that. And the guy wanted to do some improvements on that land. And as soon as he filed the paperwork, his land, his home and buildings started getting shot up. and then somebody burned his house down. And that happened in 2014. And that satellite photo, if you could put that satellite photo up there again, Dr. Telesco, you will see this house right here. There it is at the bottom of the screen. You see the West Juliet Road. I'm sorry, not South, West Juliet Road. You'll see that it is burned. And the guy never did rebuild the house. He still owns the land. And I've looked all over the place to try to find out what the cause of this fire was. Have not been able to find it. And so he never did rebuild the land. I think he moved somewhere else, but he still owns that piece of land. So as soon as he wanted to do any improvements on this land, somebody didn't want him to do that. But still, they've brought dogs out there. They still have not found anything on that piece of land, though. I should admit that. After this all happened, they brought dogs out and found nothing. Now, more recently, there was a dig that happened in 2017, and that's the blue house picture. This is an address, 100 South Margaret Street in Joliet, Illinois. There was a dig at this house in 2017. So after I actually covered the disappearance for the program back in 2016, they dug in the basement. And the reason they looked at this house is at the time of Robin's disappearance in 1990, John Romo, who was in that picture before, who is Tony Marquez's stepbrother, he was working in the basement of this house, laying concrete. I think that's the kind of work that he did. And so there was a belief that maybe due to that, he might have put Robin's body in the basement of this house. They went in there, dug around, they didn't find anything. But that has been the most recent any action, at least the public can see, of the investigation into the disappearance of Robin Abrams. Now, there was also a grand jury that was held in 2014. Nothing has come from that. But probably here is probably the kicker to this entire, and we got 20 some minutes to go. I want to leave some time for some discussion and everything. The kicker to this is back in 1990, in paperwork that I've not seen, but both Jody told me about it and this officer that I talked to knew about it. At some point, somebody in the Will County Attorney's Office in 2012, once again this year when this private investigator got all this information, somebody in the Will County Attorney's Office called Jody and told her, I just want you to know something. We have paperwork here that says that in 1990, when this investigation first started into Robin Abrams' disappearance, Tony Marquez's wife told investigators that she believed that Tony killed Robin. His own wife said that in 1990. 30 years later, they're still married. I don't know what to make of that. But that's what this person who called Jody told her. Among all the other information that came out in 2012, that was the information that I found out. In talking to this other person recently, just yesterday, my opinion on Robin's disappearance has changed since 2016. At the beginning, I believed that this was, and this happens. I mean, in general, it's a very common scenario. Woman wants to break up with guy gets ticked off, causes the woman's disappearance. Very common. Wives disappear. We've covered quite a few of those recently. Angela Green, Marion Hurley. Very common. But I've changed my theory on this a little bit. It's obvious to me that the reason that somebody had to make Robin disappear is because her sexual harassment lawsuit, which was huge and all these people poking around and everything, was going to expose extreme corruption in the Will County Sheriff's Office at that time. I was told by, once again, an officer who worked in that department that he found out years later, these guys were all mobbed up. They were running interference for the mob, doing this, doing that, and people were afraid that, hey, you got to shut this woman up because all these investigators are going to find out everything that was going on at the time. I'm not here to tell you that the Will County Sheriff's Department in 2020 is like that. I don't know. I, of course, hope not. But it also occurs to me that you wonder if Will County or the state police would really want to get into something that would expose all of this corruption all these years later, even though they were not the ones who did it back at that time. But we all know about police departments and everything going on in the United States in the year 2020 now. But I wonder if they're just looking to sweep this all on the rug. They're just thinking hey, we didn't do this. None of us, a lot of us were just kids when this happened. Why bring up old news? It's under the rug. All these guys are retired. Some of them are dead, etc., etc., etc. But that's how my attitude has changed. This was just not simply a lover's quarrel. This was a lot of people were afraid that she was going to get in the way of them making a lot of illegal dollars on the side. So that's the disappearance of Robin Abrams. It's horrible. It is one of the most egregious behaviors of law enforcement that I've encountered in almost 200 disappearances. It really is. And we've covered some others that were bad too, but this is easily the worst.
And I think that what's really interesting is that a law enforcement officer spoke to you recently. In fact, this week?
Yesterday.
And sort of corroborates your theory, and so this isn't some far-fetched conspiracy idea, and it's just really interesting. I just finished watching, I think it might have been on Netflix. It's called The Trial, or Trial 4, I think it is. And it goes into detail about the Boston Police Department, and not too long ago, where there was this rampant corruption, and a police officer was murdered, Officer Mulligan, and he was murdered, and then the murder was sort of pinned on this poor kid who may have been in the wrong place at the wrong time, kind of thing, but then spent 20-something years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. And if you have a chance, this kind of dovetails on what you're talking about here, with corruption in the police department, and you say this can't be, in today's day and age, and that's why when you told me about this, I asked you, how big is this police department? And you said fairly large, like about 600. Nothing compared to Boston, nothing compared to NYPD, but not 13 deputies. It's 600.
Right.
And so what really is interesting is when a police officer comes forward, and I'm not surprised that he asked you to be off the record, because there's probably going to be ramifications if in policing. And I want your viewers to understand that again, we don't want to broad brush stroke any group ever. We want to take every case by case and look at it carefully. But from everything that you're discussing, it really sounds and kind of, it smells like a duck and it sounds like a duck, and it's and it walks like a duck, it's a duck kind of thing. So it does sound like there's mafia connections based on some of the consequences.
Well, I should have mentioned something. They got a description. Now, the state police, what they did was they said it was a red tow truck that dropped her car off there, but that was a way to mislead people that were anybody that wanted to come forward and figure out if they were just lying or not. The actual tow truck that dropped her car off was black with silver bumper, and they figured out that the tow truck came from a tow company run by the mob.
And so when, and just for our viewers so that they know and understand, when you think about the mob, right? It's not The Godfather, it's not The Sopranos, not today anyway. Today organized crime has taken many, many different forms, and it's not your Hollywood mafia. Or mob or organized crime. So, but everything that you've talked about just has all for me, has all of the makings of organized crime, and the way in which organized crime operates. You know, the way in which they their tactics. You know, disappearances, burning houses down. You know, towing
Shooting
somebody's
up a
car.
house. Yes.
You know,
yes.
all of that stuff just sounds very much organized crime like. So the other interesting part of this is, you know, corruption. You say, well, why get rid of her? Like, how much is at stake if she speaks, if she talks, if any of the information that she has is divulged? What's at stake? Well, lots of money is at stake. If there's rampant systematic corruption that's going on, we're talking about a lot of money. One of the things that we also know is that police officers don't really make that much money, you know, for what they do.
Yeah.
For what they do, for how they put their lives on the line, they're not making a lot of money. And so one of the ways in which Internal Affairs would do an investigation, the first thing they do is look at the officers in question and their credit reports. And they would look at, are they living above their means? And if they are, how are they affording that? And where's
the thing was, at least in Will County, because that came up in my conversation yesterday, the Internal Affairs Department was all corrupt as well. To hear
well,
this,
that sounds like the days of Serpico in New York, which was in the 70s. You know, like way back when.
Yeah.
You know, I'd like to think that Internal Affairs now at a larger level in a larger police department is at least actually investigating cases.
Yeah.
You know? So yeah, I mean, I want to take an opportunity. It's 10 to the hour to see if anybody on YouTube has any questions, and also to bring on our two undergrad seniors, Josh Enfinger and David Troxel, and see if they have what their insight is or what their feedback is on what they've heard so far. So I'll ask Josh and David to come on, and meanwhile, I'm going to monitor YouTube and see if there's any comments.
Okay.
David, do you want to go first? I see you popped your head in.
Sure. Hi, Ed. Thanks for joining us as usual.
You're welcome.
Well, honestly, it sounds like a lot of what you hear in the movies, you know, back in the 80s and 90s, with a lot of corruption, a lot of police involvement with either mob ties or organized crime in general. And unfortunately, it sounds like this young woman got caught up in that situation. And, you know, I don't want to assume they took care of her, but it certainly points in that direction.
Yeah, you should know regarding Tony Marquez, he did get fired from the police, from that department in 1990, not long after Robin disappeared. But you should know, for the last 30 years, he's run a successful insurance business and was given many awards over that time from the Chamber of Commerce and everywhere else, even though this had all gone on. You know, he was able to walk away from this scot-free.
Well, as you well know, you know, there's many, you know, history shows many organized crime members have received many awards for doing many supposedly outstanding things.
Right, that's true.
While in a private setting, they're doing quite the opposite.
Right.
So
that's right.
It really brings into question the character of the individuals. And obviously seeing the detailed police reports and things like this, it honestly, it just doesn't look good. I hate to really state any assumptions because I know we have some family members watching and things like that. But I think you're pretty much on the right track. There's a lot of corruption, a lot of things going on in the background. You know, corruption of the police department with internal affairs, general officers. Plus, you got to look at it. You're looking at 1990 when Chicago was still very active with organized crime. So it could have very easily led back to that.
Yeah. The other thing that came out in my discussion yesterday is that all of the people who were not involved in this, it's clear to me they were scared of these guys. and this is something I think that, whether you're going to be a police officer or in any profession, there's going to become a time where you're going to be put to the test about your integrity, your character, in which are you going to go along to get along and watch these things happen, and just say, well, I'm just going to stay out of it. I'll just keep doing my job and just stay away from those guys. Or are you, going to raise your, head up and take those risks because you realize that what people are doing is wrong? And it's obvious to me in talking to this guy yesterday that many police officers were afraid, if we do anything against these people, what's going to happen to our children, our wives, our girlfriends,
Exactly.
our houses? And I just have to be honest. And I like this guy. We got along very well yesterday. I think he's a good guy. But I told him, he said, well, I really hope that, Robin's family can get closure on this and everything. So I just simply told him the time to do something was back in 1990. Not to be harsh, but the time to stand up to this and everything that was going on was then, not now. It's been 30 years. So I like him. He's very informative. I think he's telling the truth, but it's easy to come forward and say all these things years later. The time to do this is when it's happening.
Exactly.
Because I think we all, and I can say this, I'll say it if nobody else wants to say it. Robin Abrams is dead. Okay? She was murdered. So how more serious does it have to get before people are going to stand up to bad people? I mean, really.
Absolutely. Yes. Josh, did you want to weigh in?
It's always so hard going after David, especially once the points that he brought out the other points from Ed. I mean, it's I guess going from like the other directions. I mean, it's so hard, especially like he's saying, like you're as a police officer, even nowadays, like saying you're considering like FBI, CSI, any of those levels. One of the threats about being at such a higher level position as some of these other guys are, especially the ones receiving awards and stuff, for some of the stuff they're completing. I'm sure there's going to be a mob member. I'm sure there's going to be some kind of destructive member or piece in society that's got that knife in your back saying like, oh, I have leverage over you. I have leverage over this if you don't help me. And like you said, like if he's a good guy and, everything, I'm sure we can't sit here and accuse without certain information. However, it's a dirty playground out there. And it just seems like you said, like we know and we feel like we know what has happened to her. And as both of you have said, there's only so much information we can go off with this without thinking constantly of like the mob or the people who he is secretly working with, people who are constantly putting that dagger next to him saying, listen to us.
Yeah, and everybody should know if they're just finding out about Robin's disappearance for the first time. Tony Marquez's name has been out there since day one. It's not like we're outing him tonight. It's not like we outed him in 2016. It's not like he got outed in 2012 when this private investigator. Everybody knew this back in 1990. Everybody.
Exactly. Me and David were even sitting here and we were, of course, we always like to have side discussions during this because we love when Dr. T invites us on because we get to like say it out loud and to the group and to the crowd. But just us talking to each other, we're like, how is this like not noticeable in that 1990 situation? And then, like you said, then they're the dirty cops. They're in uniform, but they're not actually there doing what they're saying they're going to do. So it's, to us mentally, we're like, wow, how can we we take these instances and we look them and use them for like now. And we're like, so this is how you would stop this. This is how you think about this. This is how you take the mindset of these criminals. And, it's very interesting to see how we can piece the puzzles together ourselves. And then once we give our theories and it's like, wow, this puzzle really isn't as easy as we thought.
And something else that came out is that there is a guy that I know. I met him through Jody Walsh, Robin Abrams' sister. His name is Tad Tobias. He's probably the most famous, what we would call nobody attorney in the world. He specializes in prosecuting murders where there are no bodies. And he does free pro bono work for departments across the country, looking at the cases and determining the best way to prosecute people when there is no body. Will County and the state police in Illinois have rejected multiple attempts by him to help them with Robin's disappearance. Wow. That continues to this day. He was on my program in early 2017. I haven't talked to him for a while, but I'm sure I have his phone number, email. He always gets back to me. But he is an attorney who probably could help them bring these people to justice. With his experience, they've rejected him.
So there's a question here. There's actually two questions. One from Angela Hicks and the other from Twinkle Designs.
I know both of them. Yes,
okay.
I know them both.
And
Yes.
Betty Jean, by the way, is she said earlier that Robin and Jody are her mom's first cousins. And please don't censor your thoughts or discussion because she's here. So, and I think that you actually clarified, Ed, what David was hedging.
Yeah, if somebody's going to say something, I'll say it.
Right.
Robin Abrams was murdered. I'll say
it. Yes. So Angela's asking, is there an investigative body above the Internal Affairs Department? So I'll answer that question. When I was in the NYPD as a lieutenant, it was on the heels of the Amadou Diallo shooting and also the Abner Louima incident that occurred, both abuse cases. Well, one was a shooting of an unarmed man in the Bronx on Wheeler Avenue. And the other was Abner Louima, who had been sodomized with a plunger. So yes, in NYPD, we have an investigative body called Internal Affairs. And we also have Civilian Complaint Review Board that investigates all force cases. But beyond that and above that, we were under investigation and scrutiny for policies and practices of police brutality. And that's happened in several states for several police departments across the country over the last 2 decades, 3 decades. And then what happens is that there's a dissent decree. They do an investigation, and this is at the federal level. So it's the feds that come in, U.S. attorneys. They're looking at policies and practices of corruption, policies and practices of police misconduct, policies and practices of excessive use of force, police brutality, abuse of authority, all that kind of stuff. And if it's found, if it's founded, right? If these after the investigation is done by the U.S. Attorney's Office, if it's founded, then there's a dissent decree. And what happens then is that the feds take over that department, and that has actually happened in some cases for some police departments. So, in answer to your question, Angela, yes, it does happen, and it's a mechanism where beyond the local law enforcement or local police department, there is an investigative body, which is a federal body of investigation via U.S. Attorney's Office. But the thing is that you have to get to them. There's got to be enough noise that happens for the feds to step in. Otherwise, they're not going to. They're gonna have a hands-off approach, and they're gonna say, "Hey, it's your own dirty laundry. You clean it," kind of thing. You investigate it. You have an internal affairs bureau. But as you mentioned, Ed, in this case, they didn't. The internal affairs were just as corrupt. Yeah. So or complicit, and so. It takes a lot of noise. It takes a lot of, what's the saying? The squeaky wheel gets the grease kind of thing. So if there's enough noise that's being made, then the feds will step in and do the investigation. The other question that Twinkle Designs is asking, or it's really more of a statement, it is amazing that this corruption state contained like it did. I don't hear anything about that state or federal level law enforcement ever got involved.
The federal, no, there were no federal agencies that got involved. State police got involved at some point, but as you heard, Robin's family thought they were doing things. I guess they did a little bit, but they just did not let Robin's family know everything that was going on, and it took a private citizen who started filing requests to collect all this information to let the family know. And this is a disappearance that's 30 years old. There was a grand jury that was held in 2014. The guy that I talked to yesterday was one of those people who was called in. And, nothing has come of that yet.
See, one of the beautiful things about this show and what you've shared with us is that you give life to our curriculum, right? Because our curriculum at the undergrad level, for example, a Bachelor of Science in Criminal Justice, we have a couple of courses here. One of them, I'm just going to rattle some of them off. Interviewing interrogation, criminal investigations, the psychology of criminal behavior, forensic psychology. All of these would probably do really well looking at this case and then dissecting it in that content, right? You know, so what makes up a police officer who gets involved in corruption? You know, what makes up someone who gets involved in organized crime, et cetera, right?
Yeah.
So like some of our courses that we have are, you know, kind of right up your alley, and I would think right up the alley of all of your followers as well.
Yeah.
If they're interested in taking any of them, we also have a Master of Science in Criminal Justice, which we have a track, concentration that's investigative forensic technology, and investigative processes is a core course. So this is the heart of the matter right here, the investigative process, and that's what you really outlined here tonight.
If I could ask you, I know we're getting past that hour mark, but I just need to ask you, Dr. Telesco. I mean, what's you know, I talked to this police officer. You know, I just stayed away. You know, what about you know, your students who are going to be maybe go work for the FBI, maybe work as a sheriff in a department? You know, how are they supposed to handle themselves if they know that there is a group within a department that are corrupt? Maybe they're not mixed up with the mob, but they're, you know, they're doing other things and they think that nobody's doing anything. You know, how do they, you know, keep their character integrity to fight these people? You know, what's the answer?
Well, I mean, the answer is
we hear, I mean, because, you know, we as citizens, I've never been a police officer.
Right.
We hear about that thin blue line, and we hear about how officers, you know, protect other officers. And I got to tell you, this is kind of what was going on there. There were officers who weren't doing this stuff, but they were certainly protecting them. You know, what does it take to break that?
Right. Well, you're talking here about police culture, and police culture is something that has, you know, speaking of investigation, is under investigation, you know, by criminologists and criminal justice professionals and practitioners and researchers. What is it that makes up this police culture? You know, first of all, there's a certain type of personality, they say, that policing attracts a certain person to becoming a police officer. I taught at the police academy for many years, and I always would hear the recruits say, I wanted to become a cop because I want to help people. And for the most part, I totally believe that. I really do. I really believe that it's a calling, it's a vocation rather than a career to be a cop and to serve for 20 years or 25 years or whatever it might be. Something starts to happen in I'm just looking to see who just came in, but that's okay. Something starts to happen. We start to get cynical. We start to get burned out. We start to see people at their worst. And what happens is that you start to isolate yourself and insulate yourself with the police, with other police officers. So, for example, I do a 4 to 12. And after the 4 to 12, I go out with the squad and I have a couple of drinks. And, you know, and then I get home. And by the time I get home, I'm too tired, or I don't want to talk about this with my family because I don't want to scare them, the things that I've been exposed to. So I sort of keep to myself. And my only friends then, and we see in our country today, right? Just look at our country and see the division, right? And there's this us versus them mentality. And no matter what side of the aisle you're on, the other side is them, right? And if you're on our side, if you're with us, then you're us. And so this is what we see in policing. It's an us versus them, perhaps, mentality that starts to unfold. So we protect each other, right, at all costs, because we're part of the crew, we're part of the tribe, we're part of the family, this police family, and we stick together. And so then it boils down to your own level and barometer of morality. So when I start to see things happening and I'm like, I don't like this. This is not the way I was raised. You're a cop and I'm with you and you're my brother or you're my sister, but you're not doing something right here. This we have to call you out on it. So if I call you out on it, now I might be ostracized. And if I told you before, it's a very dangerous job, seeing people at their worst. I don't want to really take the chance and the risk of you not backing me up. So if I'm, known now as the rat or a snitch, which nobody likes in any profession, I don't care if it's policing, if it's the medical profession, if it's students. Nobody likes a rat. Nobody, right? Even if the rat or whistleblower or person who had enough courage and strength to come forward comes forward, there's going to be consequences. And in policing, you want to be really careful that you don't piss somebody off, because if you do, then when shots are being fired or you're being, there's a resisting arrest situation and you're getting your butt kicked, you want to make sure that other police officers, the brotherhood, the sisterhood is coming to help you. The cavalry. I want the cavalry to come and get me, and help me. But if I'm known as the snitch and the rat, because don't forget, this is like, if it's massive corruption like you talked about, and it's systemic, you don't want your house to be burned. So I mean, all of this it's very complex. It's a great question, and
without an easy answer.
Without any answer, I don't think, really. Just to talk about some of the sort of explanatory factors of police culture, what makes us all tick as police. And I'll close with this. I was a rookie. I mean a rookie. Like I think I had like a week on the job. All right. And this is and my two students now are gonna, they're gonna like laugh and say, was that during the horse and buggy era? No, it wasn't. But it was in the 80s. It was in the early 80s, before they were born. And I had only a week on the job, out of the academy, fresh out of the academy. And I remembered sitting in academy classes, listening to, if some wrongdoing is happening, you're supposed to say something. You're supposed to say something. Call the supervisor, call internal affairs, whatever you're supposed to do. This is what you're taught. This is what the patrol guide says. The manual tells you these are the rules. You're supposed to do that. So we were on this job, and it was a chase, and I think it was a chain snatch or something like that back in New York and in the housing projects in Brooklyn. And it was a chain snatch, and a guy was running through the projects, and we were chasing, and it was like a really wound up on a roof landing. And there had to be about 20 cops, and I don't know if any of your viewers could tell, but I'm not a very tall individual. All right. And being a woman and not being tall, and being a rookie was like strike one, strike two, strike three. They handcuffed him. They got the suspect. And by the time we all arrived, the latter group of people that started arriving, it was already really done. It was over. Guy's handcuffed, and they start to beat him up. He's handcuffed. Handcuffed. Game over. Game over. That's it. It's over.
Yeah.
And this happened like within like seconds. Like seconds. You say, one punch, two punch, three punch, and a kick maybe. Like, so 4 things maybe happened. I could see it from a distance. I'm about maybe 100 feet away. And as a crowd, it's 20 people. It's like a gang now. It's like a gang fight, right? And inside of me, there was this little voice. This little voice that was saying, stop. Stop. Game over. It's done. He's under arrest. He's handcuffed. Stop. And again, when these things are unfolding, they happen in a matter of seconds, not minutes, not hours. And, you can't like fast forward or rewind the tape and go in slow motion. It's all happening like that. And I'm remembering my academy days as I'm standing on this roof landing and I'm thinking, I was taught what to do. I have to stop this.
Yeah.
Someone else, a male voice, probably a tall male voice, who had a lot of time on the job, said, enough, stop, and grabbed the perpetrator and safeguarded him and took him down the steps safely.
Mm-hmm.
There was no injuries, thank God. But I remember that story and I remember that incident as if it were yesterday, and it was in 1983. And I'm here to tell you that bothers me to a degree that I can't even describe. Why does it bother me? Because I wanted to say something. And I knew it was wrong what was happening. And I didn't. I didn't say anything. And I don't know if I didn't say anything because I knew I was a rookie. I'm a woman trying to fit in, too short, too far away from the scene. I don't know what the reasons were, but it happened in a matter of seconds. And I'm a good guy. I know I'm one of the good guys, and my moral fiber is impeccable. And yet I didn't say anything. So that, I don't know if that answers.
Yeah. Yeah. It's tough.
Yeah.
It's tough.
It is tough. It is tough.
Yeah.
So, hey, you get the last word.
Okay. Well, it's great being on the program. Thank you for answering that question, Dr. Telesco. I'm looking forward to 2021 when we can do this all again, maybe in person. But just so everybody knows, another episode of Unfound will be coming out tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern. It will be the disappearance of Gala Shaper. She disappeared from Moscow, Idaho in 1979. So we're going way back 41 years ago. And this is one of those disappearances where it looks, at least on the surface, like her husband did something to her, but then many years later, some new information, something happened that now causes everybody to look at a different possible scenario. So that'll come out tomorrow, once again, 2 p.m. Eastern on iTunes, Podomatic, Spotify, and a host of other podcast platforms.
Excellent.
But I enjoyed being here this evening. To talk with you, to talk with some of your students,
yes,
and to talk about Robin Abrams. And I'm hoping that this is going to put new light and on this and ruffle some feathers up there in Illinois.
Excellent. Thank you so much again, Ed, for joining us. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to 2021 for many reasons. But one in particular is to start lining up some more shows with you, some more YouTube live sessions with you, as well as getting some other guests on as well. This was a great season of YouTube live sessions that we've had together. I want to thank our viewers for watching, and especially a lot of your followers, Ed. Thank you.
Yeah, they're very loyal. I thank all of them.
They are very loyal, and I really appreciate that they were here. I put my email in the chat, gt243@nova.edu. If you have any questions about our programs, about anything that we do, about our bachelor's degree in criminal justice, our master's degree in criminal justice, or our PhD in criminal justice, to please feel free to reach out to me, and I'd be so happy to talk to you and answer any questions that you might have. I also want to thank Dr. Jacobskind, who was on, and Dr. Kushner, one of my bosses, who was on. I really appreciate my two guys, David Troxel and Joshua Enfinger, both who will be graduating next May. They'll be graduating, and maybe Ed, you can come to graduation. We would love to have you.
All right, that'd be cool.
As one of our guests for graduation.
Cool.
So
okay.
If you watch, you're obviously watching us on YouTube, make sure that you hit the subscribe button and notifications bell so that you get more information about when we go live. But thank you again, and happy Thanksgiving, Ed.
Happy Thanksgiving to you,
And
Dr.
happy
Telesco. Thank you for having me.
to all of you, and thank you, Betty Jean, for being on as well. And be safe, be well.